Okay, today it's a Thursday night, and we're going to study Parashat Toledot. That's tomorrow's Shabbat's reading. This week's parasha. So, okay, we're looking at this text. It's in the middle of chapter 25 in Bereshit. It starts Ve'ele Toledot Yitzhak ben Avraham, a continuation of the sort of a continuation. We read about the Toledot Ishmael, the genealogy of Ishmael. Now we go to the genealogy of Yitzhak. We read of Ele Vayitzhak ben 40 shana. Yitzhak was 40 years old when he married Rivka, Ahod Lavan Arami Lo Lisha, with their full Yehus, the full genealogy. I don't even think that I had to mention that, but it comes up every year. I hear it from teachers, from parents, that they speak about the age of Rivka when she got married. They said that she was 3 years old. So just to make sure that everybody knows that she was not 3 years old. It's not written in the Torah anywhere. It's impossible. No one in his right mind would have been sitting today at a wedding of a 3-year-old with a 40-year-old man. Would call the police right away. So this is definitely not the case. The reason the Midrash came up with that was the juxtaposition that the Torah wrote together, the Akedah, the death of Sarah, and the birth of Rivka. But first of all, when Yitzhak was taken to the Akedah, he was much younger, maybe a teenager, maybe 7 years old. So if Rivka was born immediately after the Akedah, Yitzhak would have been at the time like 14, something like that, and she would have been 30 when she got married. Most probably, since the Torah doesn't mention that, Rivka was a teenager, was maybe 17, 18, or a little older than that. The one thing that throws people off, and I have to mention that, besides the juxtaposition, is that when she travels to Canaan to see Yitzhak, this is in chapter 24, we see that one of the people who accompany her is her wet nurse. This in chapter 24, verse 59, and they went and they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men. So they say, if the nurse went with her, right, that means that she was very young. She was a young child. But what people don't realize maybe is that many, even today, there are many people who, especially girls, would continue their relation with their nanny till a much older age. And I think that a good proof for that is from a later pasuk in Bereshit. I'll show you where this is. Then when it says when Yaakov came back from Haran, and it's at least 20 years after he escaped to Haran. So Rivka had Yaakov grew up, Yaakov went to Haran. So how old was Rivka at the time? She was maybe 100 years old. How old was her wet nurse? So, and at that time, the Torah says in chapter 35, verse 8, Vatamud Devorah mineket Rivka. When Yaakov came back from Haran, that's when Devorah, the wet nurse of Rivka, passed away, and they buried her. So apparently this was a woman who was very, very close with Rivka, and that's why she's mentioned. That's why she took her with her, and that's why she's mentioned when she passes away. And I think it's very probable that this story highlights what I mentioned last week, that Rivka does not communicate with Yitzhak. First, because Yitzhak is a very, very rigorous person. Maybe even is reclusive because of the experience of the Akedah. And second, because she felt that when she was a younger woman, and the servant came to search for a bride for Yitzhak, nobody asked for her opinion. So she had no one to talk to. So who can she talk to? She talks to her nurse. Her nurse becomes her confidant. She only speaks with her. So now, in verse 22 of chapter 25, we read that the children struggles within her, and she goes to ask Hashem what is happening. Rashi, famous commentary on this pasuk, Rashi says based on the Midrash, those children, Yaakov and Esau, were rushing to get out when they passed the synagogue. Yaakov wants to get out when they pass a pagan temple. Esau wants to get out. That Midrash was written at the time where in Israel the two cultures were clashing: the Hellenistic culture, the Greek paganism, and Judaism. And Rashi picks up that Midrash because he lives also in a period where there's a clash between the Christianity that is prevalent everywhere you go. You see images and idols and statues or so on, and Judaism. So this is a Midrash that works well for Rashi and his environment and his readers. But the pshat of the pasuk, if we're just trying to say what is the meaning of the pasuk, what really happened there, is just that what she heard about pregnancies was different than what she experienced. Maybe they were not. It was not very common to have twins at the time. So for her, it's like, what is going on? So she goes and seeks God's advice, and that is an enigmatic statement. Vatelech lidrosh et Hashem. She went to inquire of Hashem. Now, if it would have said Vatidrosh et Hashem, she sought God's advice, then we could have said that it means that she tried to have a prophecy. She tried to communicate with God, but because we have the added word Vatelech, she went. It means that she went to someone. Who was that someone? The only people that we know that were close to God, or to Hashem, this Hashem, the name of Havaya, were Avraham and Yitzhak, and she obviously did not ask Yitzhak because Yitzhak was unaware of the different status of Yaakov and Esau. So that leaves us with Avraham. Is it possible that she asked Avraham? Maybe. Is it possible that there were other people at the time who were able to talk to Hashem or who claimed they did talk to Hashem? Could be. According to the Midrash, it was Shem ben Noah, but that has no support in the text whatsoever. But okay, we assume that she went to ask someone. Now, what is she told? You have two nations in your womb, and they will be separate from each other. One will be greater than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Now, when he says that, it seems obvious. I mean, whoever represents God tells this to Rivka. It seems obvious that Yaakov, the younger, is greater than Esau, the older. But we know later on that Yaakov will be the younger. So, the obvious question is, why didn't she tell Yitzhak? You went and you asked Hashem. And this is the answer that you received. Go to your husband and say, listen, I was told by God that this is the hierarchy of the family. We should follow that. So, to say that it was just because she was afraid to talk to him, or she felt that the women are unheard, were not listened to, it's hard to imagine. It's really a tough question. I think that the reason that she did not come and tell Yitzhak, this is what I heard, is that she herself questioned it. That she was thinking, who is the Rav and who is the Tzayir? Who is the greater and who is the younger? Because the phrasing of the prophecy, we don't know. Like I said, we don't know who she asked. Maybe after she asked and she received the prophecy, she was doubting whether this is exactly as it sounds, or this is a prophecy that no matter what happens would be interpreted correctly. Meaning, Rav v'Tzair, great, is translated here as the elder and the younger, but it could only also be in Hebrew the greater and the smaller. Rav is great, is in quantity or in strength, and Tzair is small in quantity or in strength or in power. So that is out of the ordinary, that the greater nation will serve the smaller nation, but not necessarily goes by age. And that is a common element in prophecies that we don't know where they originated from, that were given in an ambiguous way, that whichever way you go, you could interpret them correctly. So I think that Rivka thought maybe this is her interpretation of events. And maybe if she tells the Nevuah to Yitzhak will interpret it differently, so she kept it to herself. Anyway, and then when the time come for the delivery, she found out that she has twins. So this verse, like about the twins, is something that's usually forgotten. Usually, when you think of Esau and Yaakov, and tell me if I'm right, how you perceive them. People usually perceive Esau as this, huge, bodybuilder, or sturdy man who works the fields. Is the he's a Paul Bunyan type of guy, very big, very strong. And Yaakov is this flimsy guy. Is like what the Yiddish called nebech. As a miskin, he sits in the yeshiva, he studies all day. He's pale. He's never in the sun, right? But the Torah said that they were twins, and the problem with this kind of perception of the two as physically having a different physical build, of one like being very strong, one being very weak, is the scene with Yaakov coming into Yitzhak's tent, dressed as Esau, to get the beracha, to get the blessing, right? And Yitzhak feels him all over, and the only difference between him and Esau are his hairy hands. Meaning Yaakov has smooth hands, and then he covered himself with goat skins. But other than that, if Yitzhak touched his muscles or his build, he could have known that that's Yaakov and not Esau. So obviously Yaakov has the same physique, the same built as Esau. I would go even more than that, and would say that Yaakov and Esau were identical twins. And I did the research on that to find whether it's possible for identical twins to have different levels of hairiness. And the answer is yes, it is possible. Could be rare, but it is possible. Now, you will ask, we look at Pasuk 25, it's a famous Pasuk. The first was Admoni, the first was what people call a gingy, right? A redhead. If they're identical twins, both of them should have redhead, right? The answer is that Esau was not a redhead. This is a misconception. This is a misreading of the text. And probably there were not that many redheads among Jews at the time. It was just like it's not so common today, except for certain communities that maybe had different strands. But how do we know that Admoni? And actually, the translation is correct. The first came forth ruddy, so he's not a redhead. More like he has a red face. We read in Shir Hashirim, in Song of Songs, when the girl describes her beloved, the girls ask her, "Ma dodech midod shekacha ishba'tanu?" What is so special about your beloved? She says, "Dodi tzach ve'adom dagur merevava." This is in chapter 5 of the Song of Songs, verses 10 and 11. She says, "Dodi tzach ve'adom." My beloved is white and red with dark hair. So wait a second. He has jet black hair, and he's white and he's red. So what is exactly his color? The answer is these are the beauty ideal in the Tanakh is fair skin that turns red when someone blushes, and dark hair. So this was probably Esau. So the difference between them was only the tone of the skin, not even the tone of the skin, but more Esau's proclivity to become, tendency to become red in the face. So it's redder, and maybe just because it was born first. And the Torah tells us later on in verse 30 that Esau was called Edom Edom, which means red, not because he was born red, but rather because he said, let me gulp down this red stew. Right? Aken karashem moedom. So Yaakov and Esau are identical twins, and that is important for the story for several reasons. One another proof that they had the same build. Yaakov is a strong man. Esau doesn't confront them easily. He doesn't attack him, even when they meet later on. And Yaakov is able, in next week's parasha, to lift the stone and roll it from the well by himself. Otherwise, there were 3 shepherds there with their flocks. And when Yaakov asked them, why don't you roll the stone? They said, we are waiting for other shepherds because we cannot lift the stone. And Yaakov did it on his own. But the importance to the narrative is this. When Yaakov enters Yitzhak's tent, pretending to be Esau, and he says, come, get up and eat from my game, what is the first thing that Yitzhak says? He says, let me feel you. Are you my son Esau or not? And then he says, your voice is the voice of Yaakov, but you feel, when I touch you, you feel like Esau. Now that is very strange. Twin brothers should have the same voice. And as a matter of fact, even if the brothers are not twins, they would have similar voice. When I got married, my brother would call me. Remember, this is before you had cell phones, so we could only call the home phone, right? So either I pick up, or my wife picks up, and if I'm not home, she would pick up the phone. And it happens more than once. Then he says hello, and she says hi, and she thinks it's me. So we had to say, like his first sentence, hi, it's Yuda. Like it's not your husband, it's me. Don't tell me anything, private. But even us brothers who are separate by 3-4 years each, we have similar voices. Let alone Yaakov was a twin, whether it was a fraternal or identical twin. When he enters his father's tent, surely was able to imitate his brother, to make the deception complete. So I think that Yaakov did not want to deceive his father, but he also did not want to defy his mother. He was torn. On one hand, his mother tells him to do something. On the other hand, if he does that, he is deceiving his father. So he thought, what would be the perfect solution? The perfect solution would be walk in and tell your dad, it's not who you think it is. I'm not Esau, I'm Yaakov. And maybe he would have done that. Except there's one problem. What is the problem? The problem is, as we see in chapter 27, when we came to the issue of the brachot, that when Yitzhak called Esau to ask him to bring food, right? It says, and Rivka heard when Yitzhak spoke to Esau. How did she hear? Because she's constantly there. She's behind the opening of the tent. She's constantly listening. She was waiting for the moment when Yitzhak is going to give the bracha to Esau. So now, when she sends Yaakov in, she also stands there. She's like, go ahead, and she's listening. So Yaakov cannot just come up to his father and says, Dad, mom is cheating. She told me to come and get the bracha. He cannot do that. So he thought, I will come dressed as Esau. I'll say what my mother told me to say, but I'll give my father a hint that I'm not Esau by using a different tone or different words when I speak. And Yitzhak caught into that, and he says, are you Esau or Yaakov? And even though he felt something wrong there, he decided to go ahead and give the bracha, which is in itself interesting. So that's one important element to remember in the story. We have Yaakov and Esau who are twins, but despite that, the moment that Yaakov walks into the tent, Yitzhak says, are you really my son Esau? The other important element in that story of the twins is that Yaakov is later deceived by Lavan, who gives him Leah instead of Rachel. And I think that Rachel and Leah were also twins. And not only twins, they were identical twins. And in their case, the only difference between Rachel and Leah was that Leah has some kind of an eye condition that made her look different. So, and that explains her frustration with her looks, because Rachel and Leah, twins, they look beautiful from afar, but when someone would come near and look them in the eye, Rachel looks beautiful, and Leah, because of whatever problem she had, it was uncomfortable looking at her. Because when we look at someone, we want to look at the eyes. They are like they say, the windows of the soul. And when the eyes do not look straight at you, or they have a certain disease, people feel very uncomfortable and they turn away. So imagine Leah's misery when people come and talk to her and her sister, and they engage with a certain conversation because she's beautiful and she's lovely, and then they turn to her and they think she's also as lovely as Rachel, and then they turn away right away. So this also explains how Lavan was able to deceive Yaakov, because if Rachel and Leah are just sisters but not twins, how can Yaakov, who loves Rachel so dearly, who worked for her for 7 years, not know that this is Leah and not Rachel? But if they're twins, we understand that, especially since when did he find out? In the morning. It says, Vayiba boker v'inei Leah. Only in the morning, with sunlight, he was able to see her eyes and realize that she's Leah. So that is important, because the Torah puts it in an envelope. It starts with twins, and then Yaakov is deceived by twins, and it tells us from the onset of the story that what Yaakov did was not right. But historically, Jews stood by Yaakov. We always say, no, Yaakov did right in taking the blessing and all that, but the Torah is not in favor. The Torah shows us throughout the story that Yaakov was not happy with what he did. Yaakov always felt haunted by what he did, and he is immediately punished with this deception with Yaakov with Lavan. So let's go back 1 second to chapter 25 and look at the exchange that goes on between Yaakov and Esau. Esau comes from hunting. He's tired, and he says, and he sees that Yaakov is preparing a stew, and he says, "Please feed me. I'm hungry. I'm going to die." No, he says, "Ki ayef anochi. I'm very tired." Yaakov says, "I want you to sell me the right of the firstborn." And Esau says in verse 32, "Behold, I am at the point to die. What profit shall the birthright do to me?" So traditionally, people explain that in one of two ways: either that Esau was completely disrespectful, or that Yaakov was so deceitful that he took advantage of Esau in that moment of weakness. But the truth is that this is sort of a fair and square exchange. What does Yaakov buy from Esau? The right of the firstborn, what is the right of the firstborn? It's the entitlement to a double portion of the heritage. When will that happen? When Yitzhak passes away. So now the boys, maybe they were 30, 20 at the time, they look at the longevity of their parents and grandparents, and they say, "Oh, Abraham is still alive." Or if he died, it was at the age of 175. Because according to the Midrash, it was the day that he died, but there's no proof for that. Terah, grandpa, passed away at the age of 205. So Asaph says, "Oh yeah, in 180 years, I will have a double portion of the inheritance. By then, I'm not sure I'll be able to use it. I'm not sure that I'm going to be alive." He says, "With my profession, I'm a hunter. I could die any day. I'd like to enjoy what I have immediately." So Esav, what he symbolizes here is instant gratification. And Yaakov says, "If you don't care about that, could you sell it to me? those are things that happen. I mean, maybe there is a certain level of deception. I'm not defending Yaakov here. The real problem with Yaakov's action is the taking of the blessing, which the Torah really is not does not agree with. But things like that may happen. People say, "Would you sell me the profit that you'll make in 10 years for something relatively trivial?" Now, people would say yes. I'd rather have something in my hand. So this is what happens with Yaakov and Esau. Basically, he sells the bechorah, the right of the firstborn, for bread and a stew of lentils, and the bechorah becomes Yaakov. Now, Yaakov never tells Yitzhak about that, even when he comes to take the beracha. So the question was raised: why doesn't Yaakov tell his father that he deserves the blessing because he's the firstborn? And the answer is, it has nothing to do with each other. The blessing is not related to the right of the firstborn. The right of the firstborn is the entitlement to the inheritance, to the physical possessions. And the blessing is the choice of the father of who is going to be his successor, the leader, and in this case is the spiritual leader. So there was no point for Yaakov to tell his father, I bought the right of the firstborn from Esau. Lastly, I want to look at what is going on. I mean, we're just touching subjects that are very deep, and we could explore more in the parasha. But I want it to be like sort of an appetizer for us to look more in depth of what's happening here. To me, the interesting thing really in the parasha is that Rivka doesn't speak to Yaakov, to Yitzhak, and I always had this question in mind: what would have happened? What would have happened if Rivka would have come to Yitzhak and say, "You know, I know that you like Esau more than you like Yaakov, but I think that Yaakov should be your successor. I really love him." What do you think Yitzhak would have said when if she would have spoken to him? Shayna, you want to say? You have an idea of what he would say? What? Okay, so I think he would have said, of course Yaakov is going to be my successor. That's what I thought also. And how is that possible or evident from the Psukim? Look at this. We know the story that Yaakov is dressed up and all that, and he comes in and he talks to Yitzhak, and Yitzhak says, it's you or not? Okay, fine. We'll go through all this. In verse 28, 27, 28, 29, Yitzhak gives the blessing to Yaakov. He says, see, the smell of my son is the smell of the field blessed by Hashem. So he looks at the Yaakov, the fake Esau, as this outdoors man, and he says, let people serve you and nations bow down to you. You will govern over your brothers, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, blessed be everyone who blesses you. And he says, in verse 28, let God give you the dew of heaven and the fat places of the earth, and plenty of corn and wine. So what is this blessing? This is a physical blessing. It's a blessing of abundance. But Yitzhak does not appoint Esau to be his successor, because a successor is the one who carries the blessing of Abraham to be the father of the nation. And he doesn't give it to Esau or to the fake Esau. Then what happens next? Esau comes in, and Yitzhak says, who are you? In verse 32, it says, it's me, Esau. And Yitzhak says, so who brought me game before, and I already gave him the blessing, let him be blessed. Yitzhak confirms that because he believed that was an act of God. This is how it was meant to be. And Esau says, what about me? Can I have a bracha as well? He said, your brother came with guile and took away your blessing. And he insists. Esau insists. He says, "Don't you have a bracha for me?" And Yitzhak says, "I'm sorry. I made him your governor, and I gave him wine and corn. What can I have for you?" And Esau says, "Wait, do you have only one blessing? Give me a blessing as well." And you say, well, "What do you mean? Just give him a blessing. Why is it so difficult?" And the answer is that these are not symbolic blessings. For Yitzhak, giving a blessing means I'm giving you something which is palpable. This is real. And from the very beginning, the moment Yitzhak understood his children, he had in mind that Yaakov is going to be a successor. Yaakov is going to be the one who receives Birkat Avraham. What is going to happen with Esau? Esau is going to have a physical prowess. He has to have abundance, and perhaps Yitzhak planned for them to rule together, with Esau as the ruler, the king, the governor, and Yaakov as the spiritual guide. So when Esau comes in, which is the fake Esau, Yitzhak gives the blessing of physical success. When Esau, the real Esau, comes in and says, "Give me a blessing," Yitzhak says, "I'm sorry, I'm out of it. I only had one physical success blessing, and then I gave it away." And when Esau insists, Yitzhak says, "Okay, I'll tell you what. You will live on your sword. You will serve your brother, but you will have a chance to rebel against him." So Yitzhak says, "I cannot take his blessing from him, but I'll make it conditional, and if he fails, you'll get it." But then Yitzhak surprises us, and we see that he has one more bracha. And when is that? When Rivka tells Yitzhak that she doesn't want Yaakov to marry a local girl. She says, if he takes one of the Canaanite women, I'm going to commit suicide. Lama li Haim, I don't want to live. She tells Yitzhak that, and this is same as today, right? So it didn't change. The mother says, "I cannot bear the thought that my son will marry that girl, so send him away." Okay, so what happens now in chapter 28, verse 3? Before that, he says, "Go get a wife," etc., etc., and then in verse 3 he says, "And God Almighty bless you, and make you fruitful and multiply, and may you be a congregation of people, give you the blessing of Avraham, to inherit the land." Wait a second. You just told Esau that you have no other blessing. And now you give Yaakov, who took the first blessing, another one, now he has two? How is that possible? You know who else freaked out, so to speak, when he heard that? Esau. Esau says, wait a second. My father didn't have a bracha for me, but now he has another bracha for Yaakov. He starts thinking, and then he figures out, oh, I know what happened. My brother now is going to get married. And because he's getting married, he deserves a special bracha. Yes, Daniel, you have a question? So, we go back to the text. We can get this question. So with this text, Esau is trying to figure out what is happening. Why is Yaakov getting a bracha? And he thinks it's because he's getting married. So what does he do? Esau says, "Oh, my parents don't like my wives." He was married; he has two wives, because he lived in Utah at the time. So I'm just kidding. The Torah never speaks openly against bigamy, but if you realize, every person who practiced bigamy or polygamy in the Tanakh suffered. So the Torah indirectly tells us that it's not recommended. So Esau had two wives, and then what does he do? Esau went into Ishmael and took onto the wives he had Mahalah, the daughter of Ishmael. So Esau married a third wife, thinking that maybe for the marriage he'll get a gift which will be a blessing, but it doesn't get the blessing. And what does it tell us? It tells us very simply that Yitzhak, from the very beginning, planned to give the spiritual blessing to Yaakov. Yaakov is going to be his successor. And he planned to give the Oh, that's my timer working. This is from Shabbat. I still have this. Spoke today about timers. So Yitzhak was planning to give the spiritual blessing to Yaakov and the physical blessing, the physical prowess to Esau, and for them to rule together. Rivka did not know that. Rivka thought that Yaakov, when Yitzhak calls Esau and he says, I'm going to give you my blessing, he's going to give him everything. And she said, what about Yaakov? And she maneuvered everything. She manipulated everyone for Yaakov to get the bracha. Now Yaakov comes in and he's dressed as Esau. And Yitzhak feels Esau. And he says, okay, for him I have this one. And he gives it to him. When the real Esau comes in, Yitzhak says, okay, already wasted. I already used it. I don't have another one for you. Esau looks up. It's on the shelf. You see, over there on the shelf, there is a nice box, with gift wrap. He says, what about this one? I think you have another one over there. Oh, no, that's not, I can't give you bracha. Why? That's a spiritual one. It's saved for Yaakov. And then he tells Esau, oh, if it doesn't work for him, you'll get it. Then Yaakov is about to go away. It's a turning point in his life. It's a pivotal point in his life. So that's the time to give him Birkat Avraham, the spiritual blessing, because Yitzhak doesn't even know if he'll see him again. And Yaakov receives that blessing and he goes away, and it has nothing to do with the wedding, and which Esau misunderstood. So all in all, when we look at this story, we come to the tragic conclusion that had Rivka spoken to Yitzhak, all this could have been prevented. There would be no tension between Yaakov and Esau, no tension between Rivka and Yitzhak. There wouldn't be a period of longing of more than 20 years when Yaakov didn't see his parents, and the whole story of Yosef would not have happened. And this is something that Yaakov understands much, much later, when his brothers, when the brothers come back without Shimon, and they say, we need to take Binyamin to Mitzrayim, to Egypt, and he says, are you going to take him also? Yosef is gone, Shimon is gone, and now he will be gone. He says, Alai hayu kulana, all this befell me. And the word he uses is the word alai, on me. This is in chapter 42, verse 36. He says, all befell me, everything. Why does he use the word alai? Because in this parasha, in our parasha, when Rivka tells him, go get it, he says, but father, my father will curse me. She says, your curse will be on me. Alai kiralatcha bni. So Yaakov, much, much later, when he reflects on it, he says, no, when my mother said that the curse will be on her, it wasn't on her, it was on me. And that's an important lesson that the parasha gives us, that we can never get away by saying, she told me, he told me, that we are responsible for our actions. So a lot to be explored, and God willing, we'll continue next week's parasha when we see the events that follow Yaakov's deception and how he took the bracha. And meanwhile, we'll say Shavua Tov, Chodesh Tov to all. And B'ezrat Hashem, we'll see you next week.